Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Is this working now? Yeah, there we go. Hey, why don't we just give the tech guys at the back a massive round of applause? They got us there. Thank you so much, guys. That's awesome. I'm going to put this down for just a second, and we're going to get started. Are you guys ready? Pete Smart. Yeah, that's my real name. It's quite cool now. When I was a kid, it wasn't quite so cool. Smarty pants. Smart ass. These were all the names I had. Now, being called Pete Smart and kind of operating on the web is a pretty fun place to be. All right, so this is how we can get started here. Thank you guys so much for having me. You might detect an accent. I don't know if you can hear it. I'm originally from England, but I now live here in San Francisco. But it's great to be here nonetheless on home soil. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to start with a question, if that's okay. We're going to be interactive this morning. Here's my question. Do you guys remember your first computer? Yeah? Who remembers? All right, so if you were anything like me, this was your first computer. This was my Windows 3.1 compact machine, and I remember the first time I saw it there. I remember the first time I saw the monitor. I remember seeing the speakers like this, the keyboard, the mouse, and just hearing the gentle hum of the computer. What did you do in that moment? What did you do in that moment? Well, you would reach over, and you would touch the mouse, and immediately the screen would burst to life, and the desktop would fill with bright folders and icons, and you'd grab the mouse and you start to explore it, and it started to feel really, really weird because it was just unusual and new, but the more you used the mouse, the more control you gained, and you slowly started to explore around the desktop until you found this thing called the browser, and you opened it up. And what did you type? You typed www. This is where our story begins. The internet, as we know it, is just roughly 9,000 days old. 9,000 days old. Yet in that relatively tiny, minuscule amount of time, we have seen some of the greatest things that have ever happened to mankind. We have mapped the world in incredible detail. We can talk face to face with people on the other side of the planet. The breadth of human knowledge is now retrievable in an instant, and you can play Pokemon on the streets of San Francisco. Come on! This is amazing. These are the kind of things that our parents and their parents would have thought impossible. This kind of stuff is magical. It's utterly magical. Arthur C. Clarke wrote this. It's a famous quote. He said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So the question that I have for us is, what is magical for us today? Now, that's probably a more difficult question for us to answer because we're really good at adapting. Have a think about this scenario, okay? So when you were a kid, if you wanted to look up the population of somewhere like San Francisco, what did you have to do? You had to go in and find an encyclopedia. Yeah, an encyclopedia. If you were lucky enough in Carter, anyone heard of Encarta? Maybe that's just an English, there's a few of you. Encarta, there we go, if you were lucky. But for most of us, it was encyclopedias. You went to the dusty bookshelf, A, B, C, S. You pulled the volume down, San Francisco. Today, we just pull out our phones and we know the innovations that we have become, that have happened in the last 9,000 days of the web may well feel routine to us today, but we're not here to look at what's already happened. We're here to look at what is about to happen. It was this feeling of trying to understand what is about to happen. What is these magical things that you can do with technology that first led me to start experimenting with design and technology? I was a 15-year-old kid working in McDonald's. I was becoming an expert burger salesman, but I very quickly realized that flipping burgers wasn't really what I wanted to do with my life. And I discovered this thing called design. And I couldn't believe that people would actually pay me to do it. Does anybody else feel like that, or is it still just me? Yeah, there we go. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe people would actually pay me to do this thing that I loved. So I went out and I started a company. That was just over 10 years ago now. Today, I get to work with great organizations all around the world, helping them solve awesome problems for the people that they look to serve. I'm currently the head of user experience and strategy at Fantasy Interactive. we get to work with these sorts of really interesting questions, trying to define what is next for the web. Rethinking, for example, the world of news, to rethinking online healthcare, for example, to recently redesigning one of the most cutting-edge and forward-thinking mobile OSs for the global market in about 3 months. It was an insane, insane project, but it was an incredible one. This is the kind of stuff that gets me excited. Scott Cook, who is the founder of Intuit, says that we're still in the first minute of the first day of the internet revolution. Now, at this point in the talk, this is the disclaimer. This is the disclaimer moment. If anyone tells you they can predict the future, they are lying. They're either confused or they're surreptitiously reaching for your wallet and trying to empty it of cash. One of the two, right? No one at all can predict the future. I have no idea whether we're going to have drones watching us in the future, whether we'll have jetpack rentals, for example, exoskeletons going through Heathrow or SFO, for example. But what we can do to get a sense of what is about to come is we can actually look at things that are happening here right now today. We can look at the worlds of science and technology and design, and we can look at the forefront of those industries, the cutting-edge research that's happening out there, and we can start to understand this data. We can start to plot these points, things that we call weak signals, things that are happening right now which point to the future of tomorrow. So we're going to do some of that this morning, if that is okay with you guys. Now, this talk is typically broken up into 4 parts. We're just going to have time this morning to probably just do one of these things. So today, we're going to look at the future of the web through this lens. If you guys are ready, we can get started. Everyone ready? Let's do it. All right, here we go. All right, rewind 2 million years. Rewind 2 million years before the first human. We find ourselves in Africa. This is a barren place right now. It is rugged, it is harsh, it is hot. And we find, in this ridiculously harsh conditions, we find this guy. We find the hominid. He's an early precursor to man. And what we find at this moment is many species, like the hominid, existed at this moment in time, but many species, like the hominid, were dying out at this time as well. And the hominid, too, were fighting, often lethally, for the scarce resources that were actually available to them in these harsh and barren conditions. What is really interesting is that when you look from this moment to the next 100,000 generations of the hominid, you see something amazing. You see their brains triple in size. Triple in size. That's incredible. What's happening at this moment? Well, what is happening is that most of this new neural volume that is happening here in the brain is dedicated to interpersonal capabilities. It's dedicated to cooperative planning, to language, to parent-child attachment, to empathy. This is a species that's actually learning how to adapt by working together to survive. More significant than the moment that we first learned to use stone tools was this moment when we started to learn to work together, and we saw the brain triple in size in that moment. Now, we were 2 million years before the first human. We're now going to fast forward to only 60 years ago. So 60 years ago, researchers working out of a university were really interested in the personal characteristics that make up successful individuals. What an interesting topic. I'm very interested in that as well. The personal characteristics that make up successful individuals. So what did they do? Well, they spent time with 80 PhD students. They interviewed them. They got them to do IQ tests. And they asked them to do personality tests. And then 40 years later, they contacted these same students again, and they evaluated their professional successes. What they found was really, really interesting. Where you might assume that intelligence, IQ, is a pretty good predeterminer of professional success, they found that correlation to be pretty insignificant. They found it to have about a 10% correlation. And instead, what they found was that the correlation between emotional intelligence and professional success was 4 times more important than IQ. Okay, 4 times more important. Emotional intelligence, what on earth is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is the way that we understand ourselves and each other. Ever since the time of the hominid, It is the way that we have been wired in order to try and work together and understand what is going on around us. It's the ability to detect social cues that are happening around us, to filter out what is significant and what is not so significant, to interpret the behaviors that we are seeing and act accordingly. It's my ability to speak to someone here in the conference today, understand what they're feeling, and act accordingly. I know how to interact with that person. It is so crucial to how we navigate and actually understand the world in which we live, and it's how we are conditioned to be understood. We often feel, I think, frustrated with technology and the web. Why? It's not because the web isn't powerful. It's not because this thing isn't amazing. It's not because it isn't full of incredible information. It's because it doesn't really understand us. Technology doesn't really understand what we're trying to do. It doesn't understand my intent. Why isn't it doing what I want it to do? This, I think, is why when we think about the future of the web, this statement, rather than the first statement, is more magical. It's not that we want the web to understand more than us. We don't want to create a web that is artificially intelligent and understands vastly more than us. That's not what kind of fills us with like magical good feelings. What that fills us with is maybe a little bit of terror, right? But what fills us with a really good feeling is actually a web that truly understands us, that truly understands what we are trying to do, trying to use it for, trying to get accomplished. That feels amazing. How on earth do we make that happen? Good question, right? It sounds like science fiction. We have no idea, or do we? Let's find out. Here's the thing. When you start to break down the component parts of emotional intelligence, stimulus, recognition, filtering, interpretation, acting, what you see is that you start to see how each of these individual parts of that process, that complex kind of neural process happening in our brains, can actually start to be programmed. And when you start to see that, you start to realize that people are actually doing this today. So I'm going to show you some of these things. And I'm going to show you going from the very simple to some of the most crazy things that I have seen happening in our industry today. And I would love just to walk you through that. The first area we're going to look at is natural language. Then we're going to talk about facial language. And then we're going to go body language. Okay, here we go. So natural language. It's important to understand at this point, I'm going to rattle this point off really quickly. All interaction with a machine is augmentation. Right? All interaction with the machines that you're using right now is augmentation. It's not natural. It's not what you naturally do in the real world. This has always happened. Punch cards with the Jacquard loom machines, trying to communicate intent. Binary on and off switches with the Colossus Valve machine. We then invented MS-DOS to try and communicate our intent to machines. Even graphical user interfaces. These are all augmentations of the way that we're trying to unnaturally communicate to a machine what we are trying to do. We're trying to find new ways to interact with technology, but all of this stuff is augmentation. What we see in that very short, very short history is every 5 to 10 to 15 years, we see a paradigm shift in the way that we're able to start to communicate with machines and have them understand us. From punch cards to MS-DOS to graphical user interfaces, where are we going next? This is when natural language processing, NLP, starts to come into play. We're going to start really simple. I'm going to start with some simple examples that are going to build the basics for us, and then we're going to work up to some really amazing stuff. So we're going to start here with Amy. Anyone heard of Amy? Okay, so Amy is an artificially intelligent bot. And now you can CC Amy on any email, and what she will do is she will schedule meetings for you. Now that's not particularly amazing, right? Like I can schedule my own meetings, like I don't really need an artificially intelligent personal assistant to do that. But what is amazing is the fact that she actually understands the way I speak. She understands the way that you speak. Oh, I can't do this week, but can you do next week at the same time? She understands it, she knows it. The way that she responds when you get this email back from her, Amy Ingram is her name, great, yes, happy to get something on Greg's calendar. Demonstrating this sort of emotional cognition. This is the basics. Let's start to get a little bit more complicated. We then start to see deep drumpf. I'm here in San Francisco, so this is a safe topic. Deep drumpf. This is an artificially intelligent bot running on Twitter. It is analyzing in real time all of Donald Trump's tweets, and it is learning about them. It is learning and analyzing and learning how to construct original tweets as if it was Donald Trump, and these things get pretty scarily accurate, right? Almost too accurate, almost too good. It's amazing. Check it out. on Twitter. And of course, we all know Tay. We all know Tay, developed by Microsoft, gamed by internet trolls who turned it into a bit of a mad lunatic. What I think is amazing, however, is just how similar Tay and Deep Drumpf actually end up sounding. All right. So as we keep going here, that's deep learning. But this is where things start to get incredible, okay? Has anyone here heard of Zhao Lise? It's amazing that you haven't, you guys. This is incredible. Here we go. In China, Microsoft released just the same people who did Tay, right? The thing that went so badly wrong. Microsoft released Zhao Lise in China. Zhao Lise is an artificially intelligent bot, much like you'll see on Facebook, for example, but just a heck of a lot better, right? This thing, let me tell you, in the first week of it being launched, it reached 1% of the entire Chinese population. 1% of the entire Chinese population. It's used by 40 million people today on a daily basis. It tells roughly 35 jokes a second via Weibo, and it scores 4.5 out of 4.7 on the human vocal recognition chart. What does that mean? That's not its ability to understand our voice. That's its ability to so well synthesize and project a human voice that it's barely distinguishable from a real human. That's how ridiculous this thing is. Zhao Lise. Now, the amazing thing is that people are talking to this, and what they are finding is that this artificially intelligent bot is actually communicating back with independent opinions and advice and suggestions which it has not been pre-programmed to do. This thing is learning. Here's what's happening as a result. You can find hundreds of these quotes on the internet, and I encourage you to do so after this talk, not during the talk. So, when I'm in a bad mood, I will chat with her. Zhao Lise is very intelligent. Think about that. Can you imagine a scenario where you're going to a piece of technology and talking to it as if it was a therapist? This is happening right now, 40 million people in China. The amazing thing behind this is because Zhao Lise is running real-time sentiment analysis. What is happening here is that Zhao Lise is actually able to respond to what is being said to her, it. I don't know how to address this thing. To it, right? It is learning how to respond, and it is demonstrating empathy. In the same way that I would talk to you and you tell me you're feeling sad, I would put on empathy. I would respond. It is responding in that exact same way. This is why we're seeing this paradigm shift again in the ways that we're able to communicate with technology. When you think about Zhao Lise, and you think about new ways that actually being able to communicate with machine might open up new possibilities for interaction, it's important to really kind of look at interaction, because really all interaction with the machine is communication. It's communication of intent. It's communication of a desire. It's a communication of actually trying to get something done. The world-famous educator, Peter Drucker, said that the most important thing in communication is actually hearing what isn't said. And when we think about that, it becomes very difficult to understand, how do we program? How do we build a technology, a web that can actually understand what isn't being said to it? That's an amazing challenge. It's a wicked problem. This is one answer to some of these problems. When we think about natural learning, natural language, we think about deep learning, we think about technologies like Zhao Lise, this becomes even more powerful. This here, if I can remember the example, is called Beyond Verbal. That's right. This is a live sentiment tool. And what it's doing here, I want to show you an example, is it's analyzing the way that people speak. Now, it's not analyzing what is being said. It's actually analyzing the vocal intonation of the way that someone is speaking, and is able then to actually detect emotions from the way that someone is speaking. I'm about to show you this now. We're going to see it being used in the Fox News Megyn Kelly versus Donald Trump debate, and we're going to see it running down the bottom. All right, so here we go.
I think the big problem this country has is being politically correct. I've been challenged by so many people, and I don't frankly have time for total political correctness. And to be honest with you, this country doesn't have time either. This country is in big trouble.
There we go. It's in big trouble, guys. It's okay, so is England, it's all good. Right, beyond verbal, this is amazing, right? In the way that we're able to talk to machines and actually communicate things verbally, speak to things like Siri, for example, not only are we able to communicate intent with the words that we're using, but with the way in which we are saying them as well. How much more natural is that to our true reality in the way that we communicate with a person? My goodness, when I want my wife to do something, I don't tell her straight out, right? I hint at it. I skirt round the issue. This is natural communication. I'm sure you can all relate to this, right? This is natural communication, and machines are starting to find ways to engage with us more naturally. Okay, now you can try this right now. There's an app, Moody's, done by Beyond Verbal. You can try this out. Now, we get so used to what once felt magical that we do forget that it's all augmentation. It actually feels natural, like it's a part of our natural way of interacting with the world. But when machines, when technology, when the web starts to become able to actually interact with us in truly natural human ways, that actually deal with the pre-programming of the ways that we want to navigate the world ever since the time of the hominid, we start to realize that experiences like this, traditional experiences, point, click, architected, find, keep going, keep digging, keep learning, can start to be replaced with things like this. This is Viv. I'm sure many of you would have seen Viv at TechCrunch Disrupt recently. Viv is an amazing piece of software. We haven't really got time to go into the complexities of why this is so amazing. Let me just tell you that Viv is a bit like Siri. You can speak to Viv. And for the most part, a lot of us who are developers here today have to spend hours, weeks, months, years developing the software, developing the functionality for a technology like Siri in order for it to be able to actually understand and respond to what is being said. What Viv is able to do is actually on the fly go and create its own programs to go and find answers to interesting questions. This is how interesting the cutting edges of the web is right now. And when you think about interacting with a person, that's exactly what we do. We might not have the pre-programmed answer, but we go, we look into our brains, and we try and find the answers, and we respond. This is amazing stuff. So we're going to keep moving now from natural language into facial language. Facial language, you've got to be kidding, right? This surely cannot be where we're going right now. Yes, we're going into facial language. Rafi Kachadurian from the New York Times says that, I'm going to read this, bad presenter technique, I'm sorry. Our faces are organs of emotional communication. By some estimates, we communicate more with our faces than we do actually with what we say. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I was working on a project. I was looking at the role of communication in this kind of sphere of kind of social problems that I was looking at the time. And one of the areas that we were really interested in looking in is in the world of sign language, in the world of that sort of communication. And what we found, my team of researchers and I, is that in that sort of communication, it's not so much what the hands are doing during that sort of communication, but crucially what she is doing with her face right now. When you cover up someone who is signing, you cover up their face, you lose about 50% of that communication. It becomes far more difficult to actually understand what is going on. Facial features, facial expressions are so built into our DNA. It's kind of a natural way that we navigate our world. They're an incredibly effective and efficient way for us to both transmit emotion and decode emotion from other people whose facial expressions I'm reading. Now, if I'm reading your facial expressions correctly, I would say that you are, we need to kind of speed this up a little bit. All right, let's keep going. Okay, now when we think about facial recognition, we start to think about stuff like this. Facial recognition, guys, you are using this right now. This stuff might sound scary, but this is stuff that you're using. Snapchat is using facial recognition. It's detecting points on your face, trying to interpret them, and it allows you to create kind of wicked effects like this over on Snapchat. And this is another tool that is running. It's called Interface. I skipped over Facebook, for example, are running this all the time on your photos, by the way. But Interface is an open source technology. And what Interface is going to allow me to do here is play a game of face pong. It's going to read my facial expressions and allow me to move the paddle according to my facial expressions. When we start to understand the basics of facial recognition, facial mapping have been around for kind of maybe a decade, maybe kind of 2 decades now, we start to realize that the technology has become even more sophisticated more recently. This is Kairos. So Kairos is an emotional recognition tool based on the expressions of your face. So if you can see here, it can detect a vast array of emotions from happiness, sadness, excitement, engagement, etc. And of course, we also have Microsoft's Cognitive Science Suite. This is an API that you can plug in and actually use right now today. Now, this all might sound quite scary. How can the future of the web be watching me and kind of watching my emotions and watching my face, right? Like, I'm starting to get pretty scared by what this potentially means for us. But this is why. This is why I'm feeling this way, and maybe this is kind of why you're feeling this way too. When we look at the dispersion of innovation, we see a very natural pattern that happens all the time. We have these 4 parts. We start in this kind of specialized place where this technology is very specialized. It's potentially militarized, for example. Maybe a few people in the world know about this technology. But as this technology becomes more and more prevalent, we start to see it become commercialized. This is where we are right now. Companies like Kairos, like Microsoft, with these technologies starting to allow us to use them and introducing them into the commercial marketplace. We become familiar with them, we become scared of them. It's a very kind of natural cycle because it is new. But what we see is that as this becomes more and more commercialized, so many companies start to offer this that it starts to become democratized. Many companies start to offer technologies like this in such a way that we become accustomed to them, that we understand this is part of our new normal, so much so that these things start to become decentralized. They start to become open sourced in our world and actually enable us to go out, and no one person is in control of the technology anymore. There's no kind of big bad wolf hiding behind all the data, but rather it's all decentralized and available for us in the world. This is what happens, but we're still right now in this commercial space. And so I'm going to show you a couple of things that are happening right now. Companies like Emotion being bought by Apple right now. Movidius working with Google Android right now to bring this technology to their flagship devices. This is happening right now as we speak. These technologies, these companies are working together to integrate these into your smartphones, into your laptops, and they're going to allow these kind of onboard chips to do so much more than they can do today beyond what they can do with image recognition, but crucially, there's this emotional component as well. What it means is that experiences like this that I kind of hack together become possible. This is an emotionally intelligent BuzzFeed. It's watching me as I'm reading, and as I am reading, it's watching my facial expressions, and it's learning what I do like and I don't like, and it's therefore serving me up more personalized content for me. Now, this might all sound scary. It might sound particularly kind of far-fetched, potentially, but it also raises amazing possibilities, amazing kind of questions as well. And what we see is the reason behind this is because communicating emotion is such a key thing for us. It's a hotbed of innovation. We try to find ways to communicate our emotions all the time. Interestingly, Facebook recently patented the ability to use their facial recognition tool to actually go through all of your photos, find photos where you're pulling an expression and turn that into an emoji. So this is a hotbed of innovation. People are trying to find ways to better communicate emotion via the web, and this is kind of what we start to see. So as we start to see the web learning to understand us in new ways, we're going to find new common methods of communication to actually work with machines. All right, finally, you've been very patient. Thank you. Moving on from facial language to body language. All right. We're going to start simple again here. Body language. What on earth can I mean by that? Body language is essentially the physiology of the body, using that to understand your intent, to understand your emotions, and respond accordingly. Again, emotional intelligence. This starts off really, really simple with plugins that are available today. This is Granify. You can download this, and I'm sure you can integrate it into Shopify for all I know. But it's actually detecting the cursor position and the cursor movement of users who are using a commercial store online, and is able to try and infer, try and predict what a user is feeling at that moment, and then interject with content that might help them in that moment. It feels like the user is looking for something, we can serve up that content for them. It feels like the user is heading towards the X, let's make sure we keep them on the page. For example, this is the sort of kind of very basics of body language that we start to see being used in the web today. We then start to see things like this. This is a type experiment. It's a responsive type experiment, actually looking at the position of a person to the screen to actually empathetically change the size of the text to make it an easier reading experience. Again, simple but responding to the body and what's actually happening around it. And then a few weeks ago, we saw this. This is Microsoft's pre-touch. Has everyone seen this? Seen this example? A couple of you. Okay, Microsoft's pre-touch is incredible. You need to check this out. It's a technology that actually sees the user interface responding to the body language of the user before they've even touched the screen. So actually, as you're approaching the screen, the UI is going to adapt depending on the positioning of your fingers, how fast you're coming in, and create an interface which is appropriate for you in that moment. This is the technologies that we're starting to see that are responding to body language. And what we then start to realize, as we look at what's possible with these sorts of technologies, is that we start to realize that all of us are already taking part of this today, right now. Most of us, I would guarantee 99% of you are already taking part in this, because the things that we're carrying around with us, our smartphones, our smartwatches, our Fitbits, are these tools that can measure physiological changes, and they are creating uniquely identifiable information about you all the time. And this is what people are able to use to start to infer these sorts of emotional responses. Again, we haven't really got time to look at the physiological effects of the body under different emotional situations, but just know that your body is sending out signals about how it's feeling all the time. So what we see are things like this. This is called Spire. It's a wearable device, and you can actually wear this next to your body. It's measuring the physiological changes of your body, and it's able to understand your mood based on what it is reading. It understands when you are feeling stressed, and when you are feeling not so stressed, when you need to kind of maybe leave Portland, for example. And it's able to interject and give you some advice in what to do in that moment. Now, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for the web that we know, the technology that we are creating? How might the web actually be able to respond to how I'm feeling? Maybe making text easier to read, for example. Maybe if I'm not feeling engaged, maybe able to swap in more image-based content rather than text-based, and actually kind of make my experience more customized, more tailored to me. This is the final example here I want to show you. This is called People Keeper. Now, this was developed by researchers at Carnegie Mellon University. It was done by about a team of 8 people in a period of about 4 weeks. It used to be available on the App Store. They've taken it down for a few short weeks. But this is incredible, right? This is an app that actually allows you to understand and better understand yourselves which friends you should be hanging out with and which friends you should not be hanging out with. It's going to help you understand if the person next to you right now, you're enjoying sitting next to them, or maybe you're not so much enjoying sitting next to them. This is incredible. We're going to hear from the creators right now, and then we're going to close. So here we go.
It looks for trends in relationships and figures out which people are actually impacting you positively and which ones should.
People made me angry is the thing that stood out the most, I think. Like, oh, maybe I shouldn't hang out with Mark. Maybe he's kind of a dick, huh?
Mark, goodness. It's using a GPS, it's using a heart rate monitor, and it's able to actually understand your emotional response to who you're with. Amazing. Right, here we go. So here we go. We're going to close now. Now, about 30 years ago, we started to see technology that started to try and mimic communication with us. We saw things like the Apple Macintosh, and we saw the way that it had text-to-speech, and it felt like in that moment, science fiction had become a reality, that machines could start to communicate to us, even 30 years ago. Now, here we are today, and we feel like, yes, we can talk to machines, and they actually understand us sometimes. These sorts of experiences that we now see, that we've just gone through, raise all sorts of questions and amazing possibilities. But as Jesse James Garrett recently said, there's a fine line between cray-cray and amazeballs. Now that is true, right? That's one of the most profound things I've ever seen on Twitter, honestly. But here's the thing. We're still in the first minutes. The web is just ones and zeros. The web is just ones and zeros. What we make with it is entirely up to us. Whether we want to craft it into empathetic experiences that truly understand the way that we're speaking, the way that we are reacting, the way that we are moving is up to us, and it's up to us to answer these questions as well. Guys, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you, and look forward to speaking to you soon.